The amount of energy brought into an ecosystem will determine the potential population sizes. So let's talk about these population sizes. In an ecosystem, what would have to be the largest population? Which which level of organisms has to have the largest population? The answer to that is the one that everything else relies upon, and that is the producer level. So we have to have more producers than any other level in order for it to sustain that other level. Otherwise, if you had more primary consumers than producers, they would eat all of the producers and end up starving. And so you have to have more of the level below than the level above in order for it to sustain that higher level. So let's look at this again. We're going to look at this idea of tracking the calories again. So in this case, we're going to look at 1,000,000 calories this time. 1,000,000 calories from the sun goes into the producer. How many, real quickly work this out for yourself, how many calories will be available to the primary consumer? How many calories will be used by the plant? What will happen to those calories that are used by the plant? Consider what we've already discussed. The sunlight, through a process of photosynthesis, is converted into chemical energy in the plant. The plant then, we're going to say, has that 1,000,000 calories of energy, and we're going to follow that through this little food chain. So we've already done this, kind of get a feel for how this is working. The plant received or the producer received the 1,000,000 calories of energy. It will use 90% of it. Okay, it'll use 90% for growth, repair, whatever whatever it needs to use energy for. That chemical energy will be turned into mechanical energy and then heat energy, and it will be released. What will be stored will be about 10% of that energy, and 10% of 1,000,000 is 100,000. So 900,000 was already spent, and 100,000 is left over. That 100,000 will be available to the next level, the primary consumer. And of that 100,000, that level use 90% for its own need and its own growth, repair, movement, anything it does, and it will store 10% of that. So 90% or 90,000 calories will be used, and 10%, which is 10,000 calories this time, will be stored inside the organism. Now, the big arrow represents that most of the energy in that level is used. The smaller arrow here for us represents the fact that less energy is stored and can move to the next level. So notice this happens on each level. Now, we've already gone through this, but consider this trend. If every time you move up a level, there's less energy available, but also notice that often, not always, but often, in order for you to eat something, you need to often be bigger than it. Not always, but often. That being the case, what does that do to your population size? So if you're eating plants, whatever plants are available, you can have a bigger population size. But if you're eating something that ate the plants, now, first of all, you have to be bigger than that organism, or you might need to be bigger than organisms to take it down. So you have to have more energy to produce or to sustain a bigger body. But then you also have less energy available to you. So which level has the most energy? Obviously, the producer, which has the least energy available, the shark here, the apex predator. That being the case, which will have the largest population size? Well, plants or the producers will. Then we'll get smaller here, get smaller here, and this will have the smallest population size available. Let's think of it this way. Let's consider a imaginary scenario. In this one, let's say instead of having just to help us kind of grasp this concept, if all these organisms were exactly the same size. They just happened to be able to eat each other. Let's consider they're all the same size. And let's think of this in a numerical situation here. Okay, so let's say that we had enough energy from the sun to sustain here 1,000 sea plants, which this should be 1,000. If you'd like to count them, go ahead. 1,000 sea plants. Most of the energy that's received in this little population of sea plants will be used by the sea plants, 90% of it. And then 10% would be available to the next level. So let's say, for our intents and purposes, just to help us understand this, that this could support 10% of the organisms, 10% of the next level. And so it used 90% of the energy, but it stored 10%. So that means that we can have about, if every primary consumer or all our consumers need about this much energy to support them, let's say that there can be about 10% of them. So we have 1,000 sea plants. So we will say that our made up scenario can sustain about 100 of the goldfish. Now, that would only work if as they ate, the plants were able to repair and everything and to make sure that they could continue to grow and continue to sustain them. So here we've got a 100 goldfish. They will use 90% of the energy that's available to them, which was 10% of the energy that was available to the sea plants. Then the goldfish will store 10% of the energy, and the next level can get that. So let's say that the next level was the blue fish. How many can, if there's 100 goldfish in this scenario, we'll say that the blue fish, we could sustain about maybe 10 in this environment or this ecosystem. And with that being the case, we have 10. They're going to use up 90% and store about 10%. And so how many of the next level could we sustain? One. So now this isn't exactly how it works, but it's just kind of a way to think about this for a second. Why is it that you don't get as many of these top predators as you do of the populations of the smaller organisms that are lower on the food chain? And the reason is because they only have available to them what they can hunt and what is stored inside the bodies of their prey. And so because there's less energy available to them, the ecosystem can't sustain too big of populations. As we talked about with input and output energy, what will happen if you get too high above the carrying capacity? The population will die off and it will drop until it is more sustainable or closer to that carrying capacity. Here, for our situation, the carrying capacity of the shark right here in this little ecosystem would be 1. Carrying capacity of the bluefish would be 10. The carrying capacity of the goldfish would be 100, and the carrying capacity of the producers are 1,000 for our little made up scenario. So let's conclude this, and let's turn this into a visual. So first of all, we know the energy lessens as we go up the food chain, but also we just learned that the potential population also goes down as we go up the food chain. Okay, so here we're showing the energy goes down, but also the population goes down. And so here, if you look at this kind of represents a pyramid. We've got 3 different illustrations that help us study the ecosystem. First of all, we had the food chains, and that shows us one path. Second of all, we had the food webs, which shows the relationship of multiple food chains throughout an ecosystem. And this last one, the energy pyramid, we use to help us understand how energy is a lot greater down at the producer level, and then it decreases significantly at each level. And it also tells us why populations are so small up here and must be much bigger down here. If you think about this, as we pull out forests and different ecosystems, pull out the producers there, what will happen to the rest of the levels? Kind of think about that for a minute. As you think about how this works, it kind of gives you an idea of the impact that we can have as we use resources. And not that we shouldn't use resources, but we definitely should think about the impact as we consider the effect that we'll have. Now, keep in mind, going back to this, this is once again showing just one food chain. If we want to, we could make it kind of take everything and look at the food web and consider how everything would go together. Because remember, some of these were on multiple levels. One of the ways that you can get it around, since once again, we can't have if we had the whale as specifically a fifth level consumer, there could be very few of them. But you can get more if they're on multiple levels because they can eat multiple different things, and most organisms do that. And so this is just kind of helping us have an idea of how energy travels, and once again, why larger populations of top predators don't usually exist. And so just review, and that's it. Thank you.